if you have a question about a correct answer, raise your hand and I'll do my best to answer it. Number 1. Which of the following is among the reasons identified by Adam Smith for why the division of labor increases an economy's total output? The answer is D. Specialization of workers is more likely to encourage the development of machinery. All the others are either not reasons identified by Adam Smith or it was identified by, as an A, David Ricardo. So the correct answer to 1 is D, as in duck. Number 2, people in an economy without money must conduct all exchanges by using a process called E, barter. Very easy. Number 3, Hanukkah wants a better view of the place, and she stands up to get a better view. And Kara says, you're illogical, you're committing a fallacy of composition, which is the fallacy of assuming that just because something is true for a part of the whole, that something is necessarily true for all of the whole. Number 4. So I give you in the table above the figures of production for 2 producers, Juliet and Margot. They can produce hats and belts. Number 4, Juliet or Margot has a comparative advantage over the other in the production of belts. The answer is A, Juliet. Each belt costs Juliet 3 hats to produce. Each belt costs Margot 4 hats to produce. Therefore, Juliet gives up fewer hats to produce a belt than does Margot, so Juliet has a comparative advantage in belt production over Margot. Juliet gives up fewer hats to produce a belt. Each belt than does Margot. Number 5. What is the maximum number of belts that the person who has a comparative advantage of producing belts will pay to the other person in exchange for 1 hat? This is probably the most difficult question on an exam. One question has to be that. The answer is B, 1/3. Juliet, remember, has the comparative advantage in belts. For her to produce a belt, she gives up 3 hats. For her to produce a hat, for Juliet to produce a hat, it would cost her 1/3 of a belt. And so that's the maximum number of belts that she's willing to pay in order to get a hat. She can produce a hat at a cost of 1/3 of a belt. So she's willing to pay up to 1/3 of a belt to get a hat, but no more. So the correct answer to 5 is B. Number 6. Suppose that Margot attends night classes on how to make belts, blah, 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 blah. Basically, Margot's ability to produce belts rises from 50 to 100. So now those numbers in Margot's column are 250 rather than 200, rather than 200 and 100 rather than 250. 200 hats, 50 belts. Correct answer to 6 is B. Margot's comparative advantage, which used to be in producing hats, is now in producing belts. Once Margot becomes a better belt producer, to produce each belt, she gives up only 2 hats. Juliet still gives up 3 hats. So after Margot becomes a better belt producer, she gains a comparative advantage over Juliet at producing belts. So the correct answer to 6 is B. Number 7. Number 7, not the most difficult question on the exam. The scholar credited with first identifying and explaining the principle of comparative advantage is A, David Ricardo. Some of you, I hope this was a mistake, put Ricky Ricardo. I hope that was just a mistake in the call. An error in bubbling in the right number. Oh, by the way, it didn't even occur to me to tell you this, but the correct way to do a Scantron, my TA handled it. You don't circle the numbers, you bubble them in, you fill them in. Most of you did that, but a handful of you circled the numbers, you fill them in with the pencil. Number 8, which of the following statements is normative rather than positive? The answer is C, thou shalt not steal. That's something most of us believe in, but it's a value judgment. All the other statements are statements of fact. They may be right, they may be wrong, but they're not statements of opinion. The correct answer to 8 is C. Number 9. The principal point of the pencil story that I told early in class is D. the amount of information and knowledge required to produce a typical good that is consumed in modern society, even one as simple as a pencil, is huge. It's spread out over billions of minds. So D for number 9. Number 10. In a supply and demand graph, an increase in demand is depicted by a B, rightward shift of the demand curve. Number 11. In a supply and demand graph, a decrease in supply is depicted by a C, a leftward shift in the supply curve. Number 12. A problem that was encountered by Adam Smith, and that's known today as the diamond water paradox, was finally solved in the 1870s when economists first realized that C, people make decisions at the margins. We don't choose between all water and all diamonds. We choose a little bit more water versus 1 or 2 more diamonds. Number 13, true or false? A change in the price of rice never changes the demand for rice. The answer is A, true. A change in the price of rice causes the quantity demanded of rice to change, not the demand. It doesn't shift the demand curve for rice. It instead causes a movement along the demand curve for rice. Number 14, goods X and Y are complements to each other if A, as the price of X changes, the demand for Y changes in the opposite direction. Price of sugar goes up, the demand for coffee goes down because it's more costly to get sugar to put into your coffee. So you buy less coffee. Number 15, goods Y and Z are substitutes for each other if B, as the price of W changes, the demand for Z changes in the same direction. These are the straightforward things that I mentioned in class. These are definitional. Number 16, the longer the amount of time that consumers have to adjust to a change in the price of gasoline, the B, more elastic is the demand for gasoline. Number 17, another difficult question. The author of the 1776 book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, is C, Adam Smith. Not, as some of you put, Thomas Jefferson. I don't know where you were that day. Thomas Jefferson did write an important document in 1776, not that book. For society to get more capital goods, number 18, for society to get more capital goods, A, people today must consume less than was maximally possible to consume. That is, people today must save. That's the point of the story I had that I told about people saving bananas and fish. If people ate all the bananas and fish that they could possibly eat during the current period, there'd be nothing to support them when they try to build the fishing net. So the correct answer to 18 is A. Number 19, the amount consumers actually get curve is shaped most like which of the following. The answer is E, a greater than sign. Number 20, if tin and aluminum are substitute goods for each other, then a rise in the price of aluminum will A, cause the demand for tin to rise. It's just another application of what it means for 2 goods to be substitutes. Changing the price of one causes the demand for the other one to change in the same direction. Number 21. Some of you thought this was the same question as 20, but it's not. If tin and aluminum are substitute goods for each other, then a rise in the price of aluminum will cause cause the price of tin to rise. So because, as in 20, it caused the demand for tin to rise, number 21 asks basically what happens when the demand for tin rises. The answer is A. The price of tin rises. So the correct answer to 21 is A. 22. If tin and aluminum are substitute goods for each other, I'm getting tired of tin and aluminum, then a rise in the price of bauxite used to make aluminum, so that's an input to making aluminum. So the price of bauxite used to make aluminum goes up, which means the supply of aluminum will fall, which will cause the price of aluminum to rise, and hence cause the price of tin to rise. It's more expensive to make the substitute good, and substitute good, in this case aluminum, is going to be more pricey, so the demand and the prices of its substitutes, such as tin, will go up. Number 23. Which of the following goods or services is most like a capital good? It's a tool. Answer is D, an electric drill. Number 24. B, financial intermediation is the key economic role played by banks. Banks come between the savers and the people who want to put the savings to productive use, the entrepreneurs. Number 25, if consumers on Monday come to expect that the price of lawn furniture will fall on Wednesday, the demand for lawn furniture today, Monday, this is kind of, so I should have put Monday there. So that's one reason why I was so generous in giving a curve, but you should have known what I meant. Correct answer to 25 is A, rise. You think the price of lawn furniture is going to rise in the future, your demand for it goes up today. What? I'm sorry, fall. I'm sorry, oh yeah, I'm sorry, fall. Yeah, correct. It is fall. I just read it wrong. In my opinion, it's fall. You think the price of lawn furniture is going to be higher? Wait, so if consumers come to expect the price of lawn furniture will fall, yes. I'm trying to be too fast here. Fall in the near future, then your demand for today is going to fall because you're delaying that demand until the future when it will be less costly to acquire. So the correct answer 25 is A. Number 26, if the price of lawn furniture today falls, C, the quantity demanded of lawn furniture today will rise. It's a simple question about what happens along the demand curve. So the correct answer to 26 is C, as in cat. 27, if propane grills and lawn furniture are complementary goods, a fall in the price of lawn furniture will cause the A, demand for propane grills to rise. Lawn furniture's low price, people buy more lawn furniture, so they want to grill out more because they have more lawn furniture. So the demand for propane grills will go up. A, 28, if propane grills and charcoal grills are substitutes for each other, as they likely are, a rise in the price of propane grills will cause the A, demand for charcoal grills to rise. More costly to get an argument exclusively by the identity of the person making the argument. That must have been something in my head that wanted to give you the answer to that. I accidentally capitalized the correct answer to that question. You notice that. All right, so those are the correct answers to the exam. Class, in your last name, look in your first name. Maybe you got mixed up that way. I don't think so, but that's possible. But if you took the exam, your Scantron sheet is there. And once again, there's a 3-point, 10% curve on the exam. All right, let's do the material. Yeah. Say again? Go over 16. 16 says the longer the I said that in class. One of the three determinants of the elasticity of demand is the amount of time consumers have to. Please be quiet. Is the amount of time consumers have to adjust, and the more time consumers have to adjust, the more elastic demand becomes. The price of gasoline goes up. Today, you have commitments. Your car's on empty. You have to get to the doctor. You have to drive grandma to her doctor's appointment. You have to get to school, so you got to fill your car up. The price of gasoline stays up. Over time, you're going to buy a more fuel-efficient model and move closer to work, stuff like that. Make sense?
Yeah.
You look doubtful.
And I thought it was how responsive, like, the demand was.
It is.
I thought it was how fast. Like, faster or more elastic. That's what
so what happens over time is that, please be quiet. The demand, from your perspective, the demand curve looks like this is downward sloping. So in the very, very short run, it's pretty, you can think of it as being pretty steep. As time passes, it becomes more like that. Okay? Okay. So, you ever wonder why okay. You're driving down the street and you look at gasoline prices over here and gasoline prices on the other side of the street. And they're pretty much the same. They might not be identical, but they're pretty much the same. You don't see wild differences. Maybe over here the 87 octane is selling for $3.95 a gallon. Over here it's selling for $3.99 a gallon. We notice those kinds of differences. And we also notice that when the prices change, they kind of change in both places at the same, in the same direction. The price of gasoline over here falls by about 10%. Price of gasoline over here falls by about 10%. What we don't notice in reality is huge differences in prices at any one time. It'd be really shocking if you were driving down the street and you looked over here and you saw gasoline priced at $3.85 a gallon, and then looked over here and saw gasoline priced at $35 a gallon. I mean, we don't observe huge differences in the prices of the same good or close to the same good at the same time. We just don't. What explains that? Put differently, what enables me as an economics professor and you as a person to talk about the price of gasoline? Like, you say, well, the price of gasoline is going up. The price of smartphones is falling. We talk about the price of some good. Why do we talk about the price of some good or service as if that good or service at any one time has only one price? So what I want to talk to you about first today is what we call the law, and law here is in parentheses, the law of one, not parentheses, quotation marks, law of one price. You'll see why I'm putting the law in quotation marks. The law of one price. The law of one price is an explanation for why we don't observe at any one time huge differences in the prices charged for the same kind of good or service. One other mundane example. If you go into Safeway tomorrow and you see a gallon of milk selling for $3.50, and you go into a Giant across the street, you can expect that the gallon of milk is going to be something in that range. It might not be exactly $3.50. It might be $3.75, $3.25. It's not going to be $10. It's not even going to be $5. What explains that? As I say all the time, a theory, an explanation, is just a story that we tell to make the world that we observe more comprehensible. One possibility is that sellers collude with each other. First of all, in the U.S. that's illegal, but even if it weren't, that's not the case. It's not the case that every morning every seller of milk says, hey, what you charging today? All right, I'll charge pretty much the same. That's not what happens. Nor is it the case in the vast majority of cases that government sets the price. Sometimes it does. We'll talk about that later. In most cases, these sellers can sell at whatever price they choose, and yet they all choose to sell at roughly the same price. Why? What explains why we observe one price? What explains why, when I draw a supply and demand curve, I can get away with saying, let the price be this. So that's the equilibrium price. Why? The answer is a French word of arbitrage. A-R-B-I-T-R-A-G-E. Arbitrage. That's French for arbitrage. Arbitrage basically means buying low and selling high. In the market, if there are unusually large price differences, they quickly disappear because of arbitrage. I will explain that in just a moment, how that happens. So let's say, the weather's pretty nice now. It's October in Virginia. It's a lovely month. So let's say tomorrow you have nothing much to do. Let's say your first class isn't until 2 p.m. You have all your homework done. You didn't have too many root beers tonight. You're feeling good. You got all your exercise, all your sleep, everything you want. You're feeling great. You get up, it's 8 a.m., you're walking, you're on the south side of campus. And you notice that someone is selling Macintosh apples at $1 a piece. You just happen to notice it. There's a long line of people buying Macintosh apples from the south side of campus for $1 a piece. Then, let's say you don't like apples, you just kind of notice it, don't think much of it. You continue walking, you're in the north side of campus, and you see people selling Macintosh apples at $15 a piece. There's a long line of people buying apples at $15 a piece on the north side of campus. That would be a violation of the law of one price. We don't normally see it. It's not impossible. We don't normally see it. And here's why we don't normally see it. What would you do? So I intentionally set the example up such that you have a lot of time. What would you do? What would you do? Yeah. You think, well, I can make money. So you know, the campus is not very big, so you spend a few minutes walking the south side of campus and you buy a bunch of those $1 per pound apples. And you buy, let's assume you hate apples, you're allergic to them. Like, you know, you were in the Garden of Eden once and you ate it and bad things happen. So you don't want to eat the apple, but you buy them anyway, and then you transport them to the north side of campus and you sell them. And you're not the only person who does that. He does that too. She does that. She does that. Yeah. I'm not sure. Let's talk about that at the break. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Yeah.
What if you still want to sell, let's say, $14?
I'm getting there. So you tell me your first name?
Jane.
Jane?
Yes.
You told me that before. So Jane, you buy one of these apples. You buy some of these apples at $1 a piece. You're allergic to apples, but you're going to take them to the north side of campus to sell. But you want to make sure you can sell. So you notice that people's waiting in line to buy the 15. So you're going to put up a sign saying $14, because you know people. Well, that's great.
You're still making a profit.
You're making, in this case, a $13 profit, right? Well, for one, you're selling it. And you take out the cost of your time and effort, but that's minimal in this case. But he does the same thing, and he does the same thing too. So he's going to charge $13.50. He's going to charge $12. You're going to have to lower your price eventually. On the south side of campus, you want to buy the apples, and you don't want to wait in line. So you go to the front of the line and say, "Hey, I'll give you $2 a piece for those apples." Oh. Because you figure, I can buy them for $2, and selling on the north side for something close to 15 is still a pretty good profit. So when you get these huge price differences, what kicks in is this process called arbitrage. It prompts people who are alert to the large price differences to buy low, to transport the product from where they bought it low, and then to sell it. Make it available for sale in places where they notice the price is high. That does two things. It tends to raise the price in the place where the price was low. It tends to lower the price in the place where the price was high. This goes on until the prices pretty much come into alignment with each other. It doesn't have to be perfect alignment. That's why I say law of one price. If the price differences are only 5 cents, it's not going to pay Jane or anyone else to take time to try to buy an apple for 5 cents cheaper than they're going to sell it. But with a big enough price difference, it does pay. And that arbitrage will keep occurring until those price differences are so small that it no longer pays to try to buy low and then to sell high. Put differently, you remember when I gave you the conditions of demand and supply, I said, one of the determinants of demand is the number of buyers in the market. The larger the number of buyers in the market, the further out is demand. So when people see that prices of apples on the south side of campus are especially low, and prices of apples in the north side are especially high, and they decide they want to be an arbitrageur, they become demanders on the south side of campus. They add their demands to the already existing demands. The demand for apples on the south side of campus shifts outward. That will raise the price of apples there. But the people who are buying, the arbitrageurs who are buying the apples, aren't buying them to eat them, they're buying them to resell them on the north side of campus. So a few minutes later, when they get to the north side of campus and set up shop as apple sellers, they add to the supply of apples on the north side. When the supply curve shifts outward, in this case because now you have the arbitrageurs also selling apples, when the supply curve shifts outward, when the supply increases, the price decreases. That process occurs, again, until there's either no difference in the prices, or the difference in the prices is so small that it no longer pays to arbitrage. Yeah?
So does arbitrage only work in an environment where competition exists?
Wait, what?
In an environment where competition exists, does arbitrage only work in competition?
No. I mean, competition makes it work faster. Doesn't have to be competition. What's your name? Great. So let's say government gives you the monopoly to be an arbitrager. Right? So no one can compete with you. You still have an incentive to keep buying low and selling high. Now, it might not work as fully, because other people can't join in. Certainly won't work as fast, because other people can't join in. But as long as those price differences are high enough, what you as a monopolist arbitrageur would tell people on the north side, wait, don't buy, just wait a little bit longer, we'll be back here with more apples. And the person, the apple sellers on the south side of campus would understand that you're going to buy up as many apples as you can to sell on the north side, so they're going to raise their price. Make sense? Yeah.
So what about price ceiling?
What about price ceiling? We're going to talk about price ceilings later today. A price ceiling is a government prohibition on prices going up. We haven't talked about that yet. That's actually very interesting to talk about. We're going to do that. I'm assuming now that there are no government restrictions on price movements. They can go up, they can fall as much as the market will take them. So arbitrage is the main reason. We can identify a few other minor ones. It's the main reason why we observe in the real world that the law of one price operates. Because if for some reason it didn't, if for some reason the same goods were selling at two very different prices, it would be very profitable for someone to arbitrage that and make those prices equal. I'm going to give you another example of the actually two more examples of this, but I want to point out what's going on. I want to emphasize one of the things that's going on. So these arbitrageurs, they don't buy, again, because they want to eat the apples. And they're in it only to make money. They're not doing what they do out of a sense of public spiritedness. And they have no idea, probably, that what they're doing is helping the market to achieve one price. They're just trying to make money. And if the price difference is big enough, it pays them to buy low and sell high. That very act causes the prices to move closer into alignment with each other. But that's the result is not the intention of the arbitrageurs. The intention is only to make money. But another thing that the arbitrageurs accomplish is that they actually transport the good, in this case apples, from a place where the apples are providing less human satisfaction to a place where the apples are providing more human satisfaction. If they're selling for $1 a piece on the south side of campus, that must be because apples on the south side of campus are pretty abundant. The marginal apple, the additional apple, is only worth about $1. It only gives $1 worth of utility to the consumers who buy it. Where do you take that same apple and move it somewhere else so that it provides $5 worth of human satisfaction? The very same apple, were to stay on the south side, would provide $1 worth of utility. But instead, you take it from there, you move it over here, and someone buys it who gets at least $5 or $4.99 worth of human satisfaction. The arbitrageurs actually move goods, and well, not services in this case, goods, from where they provide less human welfare to where they provide more human welfare. Even without producing anything. The arbitrageurs arbitrageurs don't produce anything physically. They just move things. But by moving the things as they do, they move the things from where the things provide less human welfare to where those same things now provide more human welfare. Someone on the south side of campus loses about $1 worth of utility. Someone on the north side of campus gains $5 worth of utility. It's a net gain for your society, about $4 worth of utility. That's not the arbitrageur's intention, but it is the result, one of the results of what they do. Let me give you another example. Let me put something up on this lovely screen that we have. Imagine it's arbitrage. I spelled it there for you. Imagine it's pre-Columbian America, and you're standing in what is now Mexico, and you're looking north. You have kind of like a God's eye view of the North American, of what is to become the United States. And these are the Rocky Mountains here. And this is all the land west of the Rockies out to the Pacific, and this is the land east of the Rockies, so eastern Colorado and Kansas up there, Utah, Nevada, California. And there are people living on both sides of that mountain range. And we can assume that they don't know of each other. This is a long time ago. This is long before modern communications. They don't even know that the other people exist. They come from the same kind of people, but they've long since forgotten that the other exists. And so let's say they live off of wheat. And let's say that this year in the West, there is an amazingly good harvest. The rainfall and weather is just right. The harvest of wheat is spectacular. So the supply of wheat is huge, which means that the price of wheat is going to be really low in the West. Price of wheat so low, not only can everybody eat and feed themselves and their kids, price of wheat so low they're baking dog biscuits for Rover. It's abundant. Unfortunately, probably because of the Rocky Mountains, the weather east of the Rockies is not so good. The harvest this year, unlike the harvest in the West, the harvest in the East is really bad. They have one, but it's really, really bad. Supply of wheat in the East is really low, which means the price of wheat in the East is going to be really what? High, very high. So high that some people can't afford it. They're starving. Their children are starving. They're certainly not baking wheat into biscuits for their dogs. Suppose you're God, or just, a well-meaning philosopher, and you observe this. What would you want to do? What you would like, if you were God, and you're a good God, you love all your people the same, what you would do is kind of reach down here and take some of the wheat from the West and you drop it in the East until roughly the prices of wheat would be equal. Not because you have anything against the people in the West or because you like the people in the East more. It's because you understand the suffering of the people in the East is huge. And you understand that the people in the West should be able, if they can, should share in that suffering. Or put it differently, the people in the East should be able to share the good fortune of the wonderful harvest that the people in the West had this year. And so I think if you're a God, that's what you would do. And if you're a selfish person in the West and you see God grabbing your wheat and knocking it over the mountains, you think it's not a good God. Hey, stop it, God. If you're in the East, I believe in God. Right? It's like manna from heaven, literally. I'm getting wheat. This is great. Unfortunately, or not, depending upon your theology, it's not how God operates. People in the East might just starve to death. Many of them, people in the West, able to fatten their dogs. But suppose one day strangers come along. They're not bad strangers, they're not evil. They're not going to rob anyone, they're not going to cheat anyone, they're not dishonest. They are men and women of their word. But they are pretty selfish. They're looking out only for themselves. They want to make money. And they got word. No, it doesn't matter how. They got word. They show up in the West. They got word that here in the East, the price of wheat is really high. Really high. And they look in the West and the price of wheat's really low. And they think, I can make some money. So they start buying wheat in the West. It's like buying apples on the south side of Kansas. Start buying wheat in the West. And they're going to tote it over the Rockies and start selling it in the East. They're not doing it because they feel sorry for people in the East. They're not doing it because they have any animosity toward people in the West. They couldn't care less about the people. They neither hate them nor love them. Again, they're not dishonest. They're not cheating anyone. They wouldn't dare stealing from anyone. They're buying honestly and selling honestly. But they're doing it only to make money. When they do that, notice they're transporting wheat from the place where it is super abundant, where it's very abundant. So abundant, dogs are being fed. And they're transporting it to a place where people can now better feed their children. And in the process, by buying up wheat in the West, they caused the price of wheat in the West to rise. And by selling that wheat in the East, they caused the price of wheat in the East to fall, causing the law of one price to operate across the mountain range. Now, obviously, when the prices get kind of close to each other, it's not going to be worthwhile making that long journey across the mountain range. But as long as the price differences are big enough to justify buying low here, climbing the mountains, and selling high here, the arbitrageurs will do that. And again, they transport that wheat from a place where the West, where it's satisfying very, very, there's so much of it, each unit of it is set, the last units of it are satisfying pretty low, urgent needs, to a part of the world where it's satisfying pretty highly urgent needs. I mean, if God were to look at that, God would be very happy. Wow, that's great. Let's applaud the arbitrageurs. People in the West don't like the arbitrageurs. These strangers are buying up our wheat. They're causing the price to go up. How dare they? Maybe we should outlaw that. People in the East like it, of course. Although some people in the East might think, how dare they? Although they're selling their wheat at a price lower than we've been buying it, they're not selling it at a price as low as they bought it for. They're being selfish. Let's force them to sell the wheat in the East at a price no higher than they paid for it in the West. What would happen to the willingness of the arbitrageurs to do that? They wouldn't do it. Let me give you another example of this. So this is just a more elaborate example of buying apples at low prices on the south side of Kansas and selling them at a higher price on the north side. Here's another example. It's going to look the same except for one word, or a few words. This is not space, geography, it's time. I'm not a physicist. My son studies physics. And I don't understand what he talks about. But there's something like a time-space continuum. It blows my mind. I don't know what it means, but there's some connection between time and space. I can't quite figure it out. But I'm trying here. So this is year one. And this big mountain-looking thing here, that's time. That's the obstacle that time puts in our way today to see the future. We can't see the future. We can make educated guesses about it, but of course we can't see it with any kind of clarity. If we could, we'd live our lives very differently. So these are the same people living in the same place. But now the difference is not geography, the difference is time. So suppose in year one, the harvest is really good. So good that the price of wheat is so low that not only does everyone and their children get fat on bread, they have so much wheat they're baking it into biscuits for Fido. They just love the fact that wheat is very low price. This is great. And then let's say God shows up. And again, I think I said this before, God always talks in a deep voice. People, who's that? God. That's the news for you. This is God now. Next year's harvest is going to suck. I hate this month. I hate everything about this classroom. Have I mentioned that before?
Yeah.
This classroom sucks. Can't stand this classroom. Anyway, next year's harvest is going to be really bad. So this is God telling you that. And you didn't know that before God spoke. So what would you do today if you suddenly learn from God that next year's harvest is going to be really bad? Would you continue to bake wheat into dog biscuits? No, what would you do? Whoa, I better save some of this wheat. That's what a rational person would do. Knowing that next year the harvest is going to be bad, so you want to supplement next year's bad harvest with wheat that you saved from this year's good harvest. But God doesn't do that. But there's some strangers in town. And they have a premonition. They're going to make a bet. They have reason to believe. No, nothing is certain in this world, but they feel confident enough that next year's harvest is going to be really bad. And so they start buying wheat today. Again, these are self-interested people, but they're not dishonest, they're not criminal, they're not stealing wheat, they're not cheating people, but they're in it only for their own profit. And so they buy wheat in year one, causing the price of wheat to go up. People in year one notice this, they don't like it. Why are these people buying up our wheat now? You're causing the price to be too high. We're not stealing it, they say. I don't care if you're causing the price to be too high. No, it's a free country, we can buy wheat. So they buy wheat, and then they save it. And when you save something, you do kind of transport it. You don't transport it geographically, you transport it through time. So the wheat travels through time, stays physically in the same location, in the warehouse or the silo. And then next year comes, and sure enough, year two, the harvest is terrible. Price of wheat's really high. What do the speculators do? They go to their granary, the silo, and open it up with all the wheat they bought last year. And they start supplying it. That'll cause the price of wheat to fall in year two. When arbitrage takes place across time, we call it speculation. So an arbitrage that operates across time is a speculator. It's got kind of a bad sound to it. I'm trying to argue that speculation is actually a very useful and important economic function. When the speculators buy the wheat in year one, when the price is low, they cause the price of wheat in year one to rise higher than it would otherwise be without the speculation. And then when they sell the wheat in year two, they cause the price of wheat in year two to fall lower than it would fall had there been no speculation, had there been no wheat that was saved and carried through time. So speculation causes the law of one price to operate through time. So the law of one price operates not only across space. Gasoline sells pretty much the same price here as it does there at the same time. It causes over time, through time, prices of the same goods to be more equal to each other than they would otherwise be. What the speculators do in this example is transport wheat from a time when it was providing the bushels that they bought and saved and transported through time. When they bought those bushels in year one, those bushels were not, had they been used in year one, would not have supplied very much in the way of human satisfaction. They would have been baked into biscuits for Fido. But now that they've been transported through time and made available for sale in year two, now they're being baked into bread for children. The same bushels of wheat. Speculation has a really bad name, but it's a really good thing. And technically, some economists just stop and say, oh, speculation just makes the law of one price operate through time. Isn't that nice? That is true. It's kind of an interesting fact. But more importantly, speculation evens out over time the supplies of goods, transporting them from those periods of time where the supplies are especially abundant to those periods of time where the supplies are short. If you take finance, you study speculation in a lot more detail. This is not a finance class. I am not a finance professor. I'm certainly not an expert in finance. If I were, I'd be rich, and I'm not. And you'd learn backwardation, you'd learn short selling rather than long selling, you'd learn that speculation can work bizarrely back to the past. It's really strange. Well, we're not going to get into all those complexities. I just want to point out to you that when buying and selling activities are done with time in mind, you're going to buy today and then hopefully sell at a higher price in the future, that's speculation. And let me point out that we're all speculators, because we all act in some way. All of us above the age of 6 months, we all act in some way with regard to the future. You're speculating now, that's why you're here. The reason you're spending your time here, and I know for a fact, I wish this weren't true. I can delude myself and say it's not true, but I know it's true. Every one of you would prefer to be somewhere else now. In fact, some of you will prove that in just a few minutes by walking out. But you're here because you're counting on the fact that by being here, you'll make your future better. You don't know that it will. There's a pretty good chance that it will. That's why you're doing it. You go to college for that reason. You yourself may have bought stocks. And you buy stock, you're hoping that the value is going to rise. We're all speculators. When I bought gasoline, when I topped my gasoline tank off in the late morning of September 11th, 2001, when I didn't need gasoline at that moment, I was speculating. In that case, it turns out the speculation was wrong. I was speculating that gasoline would be much more difficult to get in the future. So I acquired more today. We all speculate. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just what human beings do. And when it's successful, it performs a very, very useful function. Transports goods from where they provide much less satisfaction to time periods where they provide much more satisfaction. Any questions about the law of one price? Now, let's look at price ceilings. I'm going to go through this first in the abstract, and then I'll give you several examples. One of the advantages of studying the more general term is price controls. We're going to look at price ceilings and then later price floors. Is that studying this gives you deeper insight into supply and demand. Plus, I think it's really fun. And plus, it has a lot of relevance for public policy because both price ceilings and price floors are in one way or another, always on the policy burners. So we're going to talk about price ceilings first. I'm going to talk about it first in the abstract. Then we'll take a break. I will pass out the scantrons according to alphabetical order, but that's not for another few minutes. So, but I'm just letting you kind of know the timing here. And then after the break will be about 7 or 8 minutes, then I will continue the lecture. I encourage you not to leave, because what's coming after the break is extremely important. And I'm not just saying that. Especially important. So here is the way we depict price ceilings. The supply and demand. A price ceiling is a maximum price legally allowed. So when the government imposes a price ceiling, sometimes it's called a price cap, the government tells participants in the market, tells sellers, you may not sell at any price higher than this maximum price. Here I'm showing it as P ceiling. That's the little bar above the P. Pricing goes lowest, the market will take it, but it can't rise higher than that. Usually it's enforced on sellers, but understand that it's also an enforcement against buyers. Buyers are not allowed to offer to pay prices higher than the price ceiling. We're going to assume that the price ceiling is enforced. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worth talking about. So when the government imposes it, it means business. If you try to sell at a price higher than P bar, as I call it, or you try to buy at a price higher than P bar, I, the government man, am going to put you in a cage called jail. So these are enforced. What happens when a price ceiling is in place? So the price ceiling, so the purpose of a price ceiling is to make the price, of course, lower than it would otherwise be. So when we talk about price ceilings, we'll always talk about a price lower than the equilibrium price. A price ceiling above the equilibrium price would be pointless. The price is not going to go that high anyway. Like the government's not going to put a price ceiling on milk of $1,000 a gallon. The price of milk is not going to rise to $1,000 a gallon. So when we talk about price ceilings, we are talking about prices set below the equilibrium level. And the purpose, presumably, is to help consumers. High prices are the higher the price, the worse consumers off. Worse off are consumers. Consumers would prefer to pay lower prices than higher prices. That doesn't take a genius to figure that out. So the government rides in and sets a price ceiling with the aim of helping consumers. I'm not even going to talk now about whatever good or service you want to think about this as being. Apples, cars, streaming music, it doesn't matter at this point. So when the price ceiling is set below equilibrium, you remember, if there is no price ceiling, the price would rise to the equilibrium. But now, because there's a price ceiling in place, the government prevents the price from rising to equilibrium. Price would rise, but it can't, legally. So it stays at P bar. The first thing to notice about the price ceiling is that it creates a shortage. Prices at P bar, at this price, quantity demanded is here. Consumers like that price. Whoa, that's a really good price. I want to buy a lot of it at that price. But the quantity supplied is here, QS. Suppliers don't like that price. That's a pretty low price. I don't want to sell a lot at that price, say the suppliers. So the price ceiling, by making quantity demanded greater than quantity supplied, and by preventing the price from rising to get rid of the shortage, keeps the shortage in place. It creates the shortage. So the difference between quantity demanded and quantity supplied is the shortage. With the price ceiling in place, consumers want to get this amount. They're able to get only this amount. The amount they're not able to get, therefore, is this amount, the difference between QS and QD. The first thing to notice about a price ceiling is that it creates a shortage. Second thing to notice, after noticing that it creates a shortage, these are in no particular order. Creating a shortage is the big thing, or it's the most obvious thing, but there are 4 other consequences of a price ceiling that I want to mention to you before we take a break. A second consequence of a price ceiling is that it now requires, with the price ceiling in place, it requires some method for deciding which of the demands will be satisfied and which of the quantities demanded will not be satisfied. So people want to buy this much. Only this amount is available. How are we going to decide which of these many buyers get the limited supplies? Which of these many demands will be satisfied by these smaller numbers of supplies? Something has to do. It could be random chance, could be luck, could be violence, could be favoritism. Something has to make that decision. We have to, in other words, this is number 2, then we have to ration the good. There needs to be, with the price ceiling in place, some method of rationing. Because we have too few units to satisfy all the quantities demanded. So we need some method of rationing. What will that method be? We'll talk about that after the break. But we do need some method of rationing. The third consequence of a price ceiling is that it reduces the amount consumers actually get compared to what they would get without the price ceiling. Without the price ceiling, the price would rise to PE. The amount consumers would get would be QE. With the price ceiling in place, the amount consumers actually get is QS, which is less than QE. Again, they want to get more, but they can't. Sellers aren't willing to supply that much. The amounts that sellers are willing to supply at P bar are fewer than the amounts sellers are willing to supply at PE. So the price ceiling reduces the amount consumers actually get compared to the amount they would get without the price ceiling. A fourth consequence of price ceiling, I'm going to put up a slightly different graph. Fourth consequence of price ceiling is that it increases the market or marginal value of the good. I'll explain. It increases, the price ceiling does, the market or the marginal value of the good. So remember when I first introduced demand curves, I said one way we could read them is we could take a quantity and go up to the demand curve, and that will tell us the maximum price that consumers are willing to pay in order to buy every unit of that good. With the price ceiling in place, quantity supplied, QS is the quantity supplied. So that's the quantity that's available now. If we take this quantity and we go up to the demand curve, we can find MV stands for, both terms work, marginal or market value of the good. The logic is the following. The price ceiling, by reducing the quantity supplied, makes this good less abundant than it would otherwise be. It makes it more scarce. Because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, when you make something more scarce, you make each unit of it more valuable. And the value of each unit, the value of take any quantity along the horizontal axis, and you want to find the marginal value of each unit in that quantity, you go up to the demand curve to find it. So if QS is the quantity available with the price ceiling in place, we go up to the demand curve from QS to the demand curve, and we find that the marginal or market value of that good is at MV, higher than the equilibrium price. The price ceiling, again, makes the good more scarce because it reduces quantity supply. Whenever anything becomes more scarce, each unit becomes more valuable. Remember, the Roman legions got paid in salt, because salt back then was a lot less abundant than it is today. The value of each unit's a lot higher. Make something more scarce, you make each unit more valuable. You increase, the price ceiling increases the amount that consumers are willing to pay for the good. They can't pay this high price, of course. They can't even pay the equilibrium price. They can't pay any price higher than here. But they would be willing to pay to get each of the QS units. They would be willing to pay up to this amount. A fifth and final consequence of a price ceiling. And this one, I can't show it on the demand curve, but supply and demand curve. It's more of a logical explanation. Price ceilings tend to decrease the quality of the good. Price ceilings tend to decrease the quality of the good. Here's the logic, here's the simple, it's fairly straightforward. So the price ceiling in place, sellers look out and say, well, I only have this much to sell at that price. Well, I've got a lot of potential buyers. So when you've got more buyers than you have units to sell, and you're not allowed to raise your price, what's another way that you can react? You now become less worried about your quality. You understand as a seller, if I let my quality decline a bit, that might chase away a handful of those buyers. There'll still probably be a lot left. Enough buyers to buy all that I have available. So with the price ceiling in place, because quantity demand is greater than quantity supply, sellers care less about antagonizing buyers. And when sellers care less than they would otherwise about antagonizing or making buyers unhappy, they let their quality fall. I'm not going to provide service as good as before. I'm going to offer units available for sale that aren't quite up to snuff. I don't have to care about quality so much because they have a lot of buyers anyway. Yeah. What? The last part. What, you mean what I just said? Price ceilings cause the quality to decline. Quality, product quality. So you're a seller and you have only 10 units to sell. You look out your door and there are 90 people willing to buy your 10 units. You can't satisfy them all. So what do you care if you let the quality of what you sell fall a little bit? When quality falls, consumers become less willing to buy. But it's probably not going to drive away all those buyers. You'll still probably be able to sell your 10 units.
You're basically like selling.
I can't hear him, sorry.
You're basically going to be like able to sell it.
Yeah, you can sell them anyway. Yeah. Imagine waiting in line. You're hungry. I mean, you're hungry. You're waiting in line to get food. And there's a shortage of food. And normally, when there's no shortage of food, you might be pretty picky about what you eat. You're not going to eat a day-old hamburger. But if you're really hungry, because there's a shortage of food, the quality of food you're willing to eat becomes a lot lower. That makes sense? That's what's going on here. I'll give you another example later. We'll talk about some real-world examples of price ceilings, about how quality declines. Anyway, those are the 5 abstract consequences of price ceilings. Don't go anywhere. I am now going to pass out, and don't talk, because I want people to be able to hear where their scantrons are. I'm going to pass the scantrons out according to last name, and I will tell you, don't come up before I tell you, I will tell you when you can come up to get the Scantron sheets. So please be still and quiet now until, even if you don't want to get your Scantron, because I want you to hear what I have to say. All right. So. No, go sit back down. All right. A's. All A's are here. Don't come up until that. A's are here. I know some people want to cheat and get a head start. B's and C's are here. D's through D's, E's, and F's are here. G's through J, G through J are here. K through L are here. M's and N's are here. O's through P are here. Q through S, quiet please. Q through S are here. T's through V's are here. W through Z's are here. All right, cut together.
Hey, you. Trevor.
That's yours. Jessica here. Like, I got
Can I read through y'all? What do you mean most of the time? I skipped half of a class. No. I skipped a class and a half.
That's a lot.
It's like, I think I did not. I like took
Yeah, but I got like 22. I thought I would get. Yeah, but sometimes I like. It's like 3 hours, but I spend a lot of my time like doing my harder courses. But I soon like, oh, why? And I would like stem forward and actually get like on my computer, yeah. I got the PMH. You can like verbatim look it up.
yes. I mean, honestly,
What for you guys? You should have known this. We're in cover.
She wanted to I'm just fine.
But I liked it in. They didn't have to require. I transferred from University of Atlanta. They didn't require this course at all. So when I got here, it was like, so yeah. No, my dad's better. So I get like better. They're stricter about it. Oh, your parent like has to die. Right? They're like, no, we won't be done with school unless but here they were like, they just needed like 90% disability. It's easy to get like the disability rankings if you just like pay much yourself. Yeah, because they can't like prove that you broke your ankle like during the service and it wasn't like. But what do you guys think? Great. Nice to meet you guys. Yeah. Yeah, I go to Rochester. I live at Rochester. Yeah. Okay. Well, I look like so the dining halls are really super. Well, I wish if I had the ability to eat on campus, I think I'd like to eat on campus. But since I just like have to go back to my house anyways, it's awesome that I'm just like commuting or walking. Basically. Yeah. Yeah, I skate all of my classes, so it like takes about 5 minutes to get to school. No, I just like I would like it more if there was more stuff going on. Like you can wait.
Alright, okay. I have a lot of questions from those of you who keep late. So yes, there's a 3-point curve. Add the 3 points to the score you see here. So if you got on here a 20, that means you got a 23. If you got on here a 28, that means you got a 31. If you got in here a 24, that means you got a 27. So the score here is before the curve. I have the curve marked in my Excel spreadsheet. It will not be online. It does not mean the curve is not there. It will be there when I calculate the final grade. Yes. Yep. Yep. If you got a 29, you got a 32. You got a 30, you got a 33. Some people got 30s. So it's a very generous curve. The next exam will be almost identical to this. Well, the second exam and the final exam in the same form, same level of difficulty. The only difference is the final exam's 50 questions, not just 30. The next exam will be 30 questions as well. And for both, you'll need scantrons and pencils as you did for this one as well. Okay, let's get back to price ceilings. So this is the price ceiling. I'm going to put the other one up first, the first graph I had. All right, so let me just refresh your memory. There are 5 consequences of a price ceiling. The most obvious one is that price ceilings create shortages because the price is not allowed to rise in order to eliminate the shortage. The shortage is the difference between the quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Second, after that obvious one, these are in no particular order. The price ceiling requires some method of rationing. We'll talk about what those might be in just a moment. It requires some method of deciding which of those many demands are going to be satisfied by the more limited supplies, and hence which of the demands are going to go unsatisfied. Some buyers are going to go home unhappy. They're not able to get the good. Price ceiling also reduces the amounts consumers actually get compared to what that amount would be if the price were allowed to rise to the equilibrium level. Price ceiling also as I showed in the graph I just took down, increases the marginal value or market value of the good by making the good more scarce, reducing the quantity supplied. Because of the law of diminishing marginal utility, each of the units that are supplied being smaller than the quantity that would be supplied without a price ceiling, each of the units supplied with the price ceiling are going to have a higher marginal value than the units of this good would have if there were no price ceiling, because if there were no price ceiling, the quantity supplied would be greater. And finally, price ceilings tend to cause quality, the quality of the good to fall. Sellers just don't have to care as much about maintaining the quality of their good because they have more than enough buyers. And so letting quality fall a little bit doesn't risk losing all the buyers that sellers need to sell what they are able and willing to sell at the price ceiling price. So I briefly alluded to price ceilings when I mentioned price gouging, when we talked about higher prices after natural disasters and what would happen if the government prevented prices from rising to the high prices that, the high equilibrium prices that occur after natural disasters. That's one application. Let's talk about another application, a real-world application, and it's one that, if this hadn't been true, you wouldn't know me, because it was my living through the experience I'm about to tell you about that got me interested in economics. It's the price ceilings on energy in the 1970s. You don't have to know these details, but in the early 1970s, I can never remember whether it was 1970 or 1971, Congress gave to the president, who was then Richard Nixon, the authority to put price ceilings on energy, basically oil and gas, petroleum and gasoline and natural gas, and home fuel oil. And Richard Nixon exercised this authority. The price ceilings, he said at first, were pretty high and they didn't have an impact. They were above equilibrium. So they had no impact. But in the fall of 1973, a war broke out in the Middle East. And that caused the supply of oil to fall dramatically. When the supply of oil falls, the price of oil rises. Oil, of course, is the major input to making gasoline. And so when the cost of making gasoline goes up, the price of gasoline goes up. If it's allowed to. And it was not allowed to do so in 1973. In 1973, you can Google this, for the first time since World War II, the United States had nationwide gasoline shortages. In Louisiana, where I grew up, we could get our driver's license, at least back then at the age of 15. I got my driver's license in September of 1973. And I had these, I may have said this in another context, I had this vision of myself driving the car around by myself. You know, the family sedan. I thought the girls would look at me, because nothing is sexier than a 15-year-old boy driving a family sedan. My parents wouldn't let me drive by myself. I had to have my grandma in the car. My mom, my dad. First time I drove the car by myself, and Dad gave me the keys to the car. He said, "Donald, you're going to drive to get gasoline." This is November of '73. First time I drove the car myself, I drove to wait in a gasoline line. To this day, I can tell you where the Shell station was that I drove to. About 2 miles from the house. It was at night in November. And in my mind, I waited in line like 10 weeks. Probably more like 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I drove to wait in a gasoline line. I'm 15 years old. I don't know anything. I'm still a sophomore in high school. And so we heard all these stories about why is there a gasoline shortage? This is odd. We're a rich country. Suddenly, the whole country is waiting in lines to buy gasoline. By the way, waiting in lines is one way to ration gasoline. If there's a shortage, people want this much. There's only this much available. People rush to where it's being sold. Some people get there first. So a line started. A queue, as the British call it. We wait in line. And you hope by the time you get to the front of the line, there's some left. So waiting in line is a way to ration the good. But anyway, so we're hearing all these stories about why I had to wait in line to buy gasoline. Why in 1973? So we heard some really bad stories. Stories that I now think are bad. When I was 15, I thought they made sense. A lot of things that seem to make sense at 15 that don't make sense a few years later. Greed. Oil companies are greedy. They're keeping their tankers out in the Gulf of Mexico in order to drive the price of gasoline up. I thought, yeah, that's what's happening. And I didn't think to ask, well, why did they wait till 1973 to get greedy? Why weren't they greedy in 1963? Or 1957? Why did they wait till 1973? Another story I heard which really depressed me is that we're running out of oil. That made sense, right? Oil's a non-renewable resource. John D. Rockefeller founded the Standard Oil Company in 1870, more than 100 years earlier. We've been using oil for more than 100 years. We're running out. We're running out. I remember being really depressed. I waited all my life to get a driver's license. Finally, I get my driver's license. And have to go back to a skateboard or a bicycle. Won't be able to drive. Buy a horse. So I took an economics class in 1977. I didn't know what economics was. I got stuck in it because I needed a Monday, Wednesday class. And I had a great teacher, Michelle Francois. She became a very good friend. She died a few years ago. She's a great, wonderful teacher. And I had this economics class, and she says, because we all did, she says, you remember waiting in line to buy gasoline a few years ago? Yeah, we all did. Here's why. And she drew that graph on a chalkboard. And it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Beautiful, non-living thing that I've ever seen. Wow, 4 lines can explain why I waited in line to buy gasoline. And it's true. And I find this story quite compelling. The U.S. government had price ceilings on gasoline and other energy sources, kept prices below equilibrium. There was a shortage. We waited in line. Those lines lasted for a while. Even worse was the summer of 1979. Now, by this time, I'm going into my senior year of college. I already know I'm going to go off to get a PhD in economics. I already love the subject. I already read a lot about it. And as you may have heard in your history class, in 1979, there was an Iranian revolution, and the tensions in the Middle East were really, really high. The Iranians were holding American hostages. No one knew what was going down in the Middle East. President Carter had not gotten rid of the price ceilings. They were still in place. And the supplies of gasoline, of oil, had fallen dramatically. The summer of 1979 was much worse than the fall of 1973. The lines were longer. More people literally running out of gasoline. Their tanks went on empty. Here's a true story. One day, August of 1979, a Friday, my dad comes back from work, and he announces that he saw that the gasoline station, about 2 miles down the road, a different one than I went to earlier, was going to open up tomorrow, Saturday, at noon, and sell gasoline, 5 gallons, first come, first serve. I told you I'm from New Orleans. If anybody ever been to New Orleans in August? It's hell. It's like literally hell. It feels like hell. So I think hell feels like amazingly hot and miserably humid. So in August of '79, these gasoline shortages are raging. My dad drove the family car down to the gasoline station at midnight that night. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, I don't even remember, by the way, being asked. Times have changed. I think I was just told, even though I was 21. My mom woke me up at 5:30, and I splashed water in my face. I grabbed a couple of books to read. I walked the 2 miles to the gasoline station to relieve my father. My dad had been parked with his car for 6 hours, from noon until 6 a.m. I walked from the house to the gasoline station, got there at 6 a.m. My dad walked back home the 2 miles, and I stayed with the car the remaining 6 hours until noontime, from 6 a.m. till noon. Of course, we weren't running the air conditioner because gasoline was so scarce. Sun's beating down. Remember, I'm reading my economics books, sweating on the books. And I knew then why I was waiting in line. I was waiting in line because of that, because of the shortage. I wasn't very happy about it. Sure enough, noontime comes. I remember seeing a guy run out of the little building and the gasoline station, unlocks the pumps. And when my dad got there, he was wise to go down at midnight. He was second in line. He was parked right next to a pump. So we knew we'd get gasoline. I remember when I walked up to the car, I'll wait for the people to leave. Was this story boring? I thought it'd be boring, people. Huh? Well, they took their books with them. Yeah.
They're boring people.
Huh?
They are boring people.
Yeah, maybe I'm boring too. Anyway, I like this boring story. It doesn't bore me. And I'm tenured. I'm all I care about. That's not true. Anyway, so, guy comes out, opens the pump, 5 gallons of gasoline. And I drove the car home. So let me ask you, what price did we pay, did my family pay, to put gasoline in that car? I don't remember you're on the right track. I don't remember the actual money price. I think it was something like 65 cents a gallon. About 5 gallons at 65 cents. So a naive person would say, oh, it's a good thing they had price controls in place because the Boudreaux family paid only 65 cents a gallon for the gasoline. But that would be really naive. That was part of the price. In this case, it was a pretty minor part of the price. The much larger part of the price was not this that we paid, the money price. The much larger part of the price was the time and aggravation waiting. 12 hours of human time was spent waiting in an automobile to acquire gasoline. Not very fun time, yeah. You couldn't get gasoline. Didn't matter what you had the gasoline in, you couldn't buy gasoline. And the gasoline stations would ration what you could get. Most stations, if you managed to get to the pump that was full of gasoline, they'd allow you to buy only 5 gallons of gasoline. I remember going to a station once in 1979, being able to buy only 2 gallons of gasoline. That's the end. They monitored you. That's how short gasoline was. But the point is, what we paid for the gasoline wasn't just the money price that my dad forked out for those 5 gallons. It was the time and aggravation spent. The amount we were willing to spend is shown by, put that on the graph up again. The amount that we were willing to spend is shown by this curve, this graph. It's up to here. We paid this amount of money, but we were willing to pay up to that amount. We were willing to spend as much time and aggravation up to this amount, valued in money, in order to get the gasoline. The purpose of the gasoline price controls, the energy price controls, was to help consumers. I don't doubt that that was the real purpose. I don't think that was the effect. The effect was quite the opposite. Consumers got less gasoline than they would have gotten without the price controls in place. And they paid more. We paid up to here. We didn't pay it in money. But remember, money is not the only form in which payment takes place. We paid it in terms of waiting in line and aggravation. Drive this point home with a not perfect analogy, so you have to play along with me. But I think it works well enough. So suppose I am obliged to sell this $20 bill. That's worth $20. So that's here. I'm obliged to sell it. So you know I'm going to sell it. And just take that as a given. I'm going to sell it. But let's say, so how many of you would be willing to pay me $20 for this $20 bill? So people do it all the time. Hey, can you break a 20? And basically you're asking, can you're willing to buy my $20 bill for 2 10s? You'd be willing to, if you have the change to the proper cash, to take my 20. So suppose I'm obliged to sell it, but the government says I can't sell it for more than $5. Who in here would be willing to buy my $20 bill from me for $5? Even more eager than a 20. You'd be especially eager to buy it, right? So that's kind of, so I have something worth 20. I can only sell it for 5. But I know, I'm not dumb. I know that what I have is worth $20. What I have is worth $15 more than what I'm legally allowed to sell it for. Now, if I were a really good person, I'm not, but if I really were a good person, I would sell it for $5, just randomly. And say, I have a problem, because I have a $20 bill, I'm going to sell for 5, and I have more than 100 people who are willing to pay me $5 for it. So somehow I have to ration. How do I do that? I couldn't do it randomly. I could go, that'd probably be the fairest way to do it. It's still a system of rationing. There's no guarantee that the person who I would randomly choose to sell it to for $5 is the person who needs it most or wants it most. But at least it wouldn't be biased. And think a little bit more realistically. I own something that's worth 20. I can only sell it for 5. So what might I do? I have to sell it. I can't sell it. I'm not going to break the law. I don't want to go to jail. The amount of money that I'm going to get in exchange for this is $5. But it's worth 20. So what might I do? Have all you people are out there willing to pay me $5 for this $20 bill? What might I do? I can only sell for 5. It doesn't matter in this example. Yes, other people can sell for more. That still means that everybody can sell it for. Everybody wants to buy it for 5. Forget about that complexity then. All right, forget about what other people are going to do with it. Forget reselling. What might I do?
Station and sell it when it's actually.
No, I can never sell it for more than 5.
You might not sell it and see it.
Very good. I might just decide, well, it's worth 20. But again, I'm obliged to sell it. So I start with that assumption. If I'm not obliged to sell it, I am more likely to keep it. Why should I sell it for? I have something worth 20. Why should I sell it for $5? I think I'll just use the gasoline myself rather than sell it for less than it's worth. Getting kind of closer, maybe. Yeah.
You can get the $5 and actually like $15 worth of candy bars.
Very good. Yeah. I'm not going to sell it for more than 5, but there are other things I want. I might need my car washed. So now if I say, I'm going to sell this to you for $5, but also you have to wash my car. That might eliminate some of you from being willing to buy it. Or maybe I need a date tonight. It can be pretty sleazy stuff. Price ceilings cause corruption. They cause corruption. People who have things that are worth this amount, that can only be sold for that amount, are generally going to try to get this amount for them. And they can't get it in monetary payments, they can get it in some other form. They can get it in terms of political favors, personal favors, business favors. Some more sleazy or corrupt than others. Having you wash my car is not necessarily sleazy. Asking you to go out on a date with me is kind of sleazy. What's that?
Yeah.
I'm not in need of a date. Anyway, this is the world. So when we observe price ceilings, there's much studied in economics, corruption rises. If you're this gasoline station owner, yeah, I mean, to stay in business, you got to sell to the general public, and so there's going to be this long line. That's one way gasoline is rationed. But also, we know that the station owner might know this. Now, this I'm making up. I don't know. I didn't ask the station owner back then these questions, but this kind of thing did happen. We know. I own a gasoline station, and the mayor I know needs some gasoline. So it's pretty easy for me to save some gasoline for the mayor. I'm going to sell it to the mayor at this price, of course. I'm not going to break the law, and the mayor certainly wouldn't break the law. He or she's the mayor. But it's kind of understood that if I make it easy for the mayor to get gasoline, the mayor can return a favor to me. Some political favor. It may be a legal one, it may be an illegal one. Or maybe I have siblings. I actually do have siblings. I own a gasoline station. And a whole bunch of strangers want my gasoline. Not enough to go around. I'll make sure that I keep some for my siblings as I keep some for myself. My sister and brothers won't have any problem getting gasoline from me. But strangers will. I'm not saying this is right, ethically. I'm just saying it's what happens. Price ceilings cause shortages. They reduce the amount consumers actually get, and they result in consumers paying more. They result in the consumers who actually get the good paying more for it than they would have paid if there were no price ceiling, paying more in the form of non-price payments, and they result in some consumers not getting the good at all. Something that's designed to help consumers, it doesn't look like it does. One other story about the gasoline price controls in the 1970s. Just a little bit more, and then I'll tell you one other example of price ceilings, and we'll call it quits for the day. So the 1970s gasoline shortage went on for quite some time, basically the whole summer. It got really bad in August and early September. People kept calling on President Carter to get rid of what remained of the price ceilings. He wouldn't do it because he was worried that oil companies would profit too much. There's no question that the memory of Carter's refusal to get rid of the price ceilings helped Ronald Reagan win the 1980 election. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but it's a political, had a political impact. That's how visible and visceral the experience with those gasoline lines were in 1979. It was a bad time. I lived through it as a young adult. People did some strange things. So I remember seeing that summer some gasoline stations flying white flags. It looked like they were surrendering. But they weren't. For some reason, it became common to be had gasoline to sell. Because at one point, you just assumed all gasoline stations were out of gasoline. Because at one point, most of them were. So if one was lucky enough to get some supplies of gasoline, they'd run up a white flag and then tell motorists, we got gasoline here, and motorists would go there. I saw two fist fights in 1979. In both cases, one motorist tried to cut the line in front of another. And in both cases, the motorist just in front where the other person was trying to cut did not like it, understandably. I saw a lot of cutting in line. In two cases, both these cases happened to be men. Guy gets out of the car and pummels the other guy. Bloodies him. Fights, violence is a way to allocate gasoline. Cheating, cutting in line is a way to allocate gasoline when there's a shortage. Some states implemented, this is before vanity tags, they implemented a system. It was a stupid system. They thought it would work. It was dumb if you think about it, but Louisiana had it. They said, well, okay, it's illegal to buy gasoline on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday if your license plate ends in an even number. And legal to buy, but not on any other day of the week. It's legal to buy gasoline on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays if your license plate ends in an odd number. Sundays, all gasoline stations closed. There wasn't enough gasoline to go around. Or most stations did. So they had even odd license plate number gasoline rationing. My cousin, Eddie, is older than me. He was an electrician and he had a job. And he lived in New Orleans, but he had a job in Pascagoula, Mississippi. It's a pretty long drive. It's more than an hour drive each way from New Orleans. And so Eddie needed to get to his job site. And what he did is he was lucky enough, if you call it that, he's lucky enough to have a neighbor who just lost her husband. She was a widow, and she wasn't driving much. And so Eddie paid this neighbor to use her license plate every other day. So I can't remember whose license plate was odd or who was even. So like on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Eddie would have his license plate on his car. On the other days, he would switch the license plates. So he'd have, and so on days when you buy gasoline with an odd number plate, he had an odd number plate in his car. And days when you could only buy gasoline, he had an even number. He had an even number plate on his car. People did all kinds of crazy stuff to try to get gasoline. The first thing Ronald Reagan did when he took office, this is no brief for Ronald Reagan, this is a fact. Ronald Reagan takes office on January 20th, 1981. Ronald Reagan's first official act, which I think was January 22nd, 1981, maybe it was January 21st. But literally the first thing he signed was an executive order eliminating all price controls on energy. We have never in this country had a nationwide gasoline or fuel or natural gas shortage since. We've had a few localized ones caused by natural disasters like hurricanes. They're all very temporary, refinery fires, things like that, but never a nationwide one or any long-lasting one. And that's because we don't have price ceilings. Price ceilings are really bad news. They have consequences quite the opposite of those that their champions intend. The consumers who are intended to be helped are hurt. Another famous example of a price ceiling is rent control. Rent control. A lot of jurisdictions, rent control in the U.S. is normally done at the local level. There's one state, Oregon, that does it at the statewide level. It's not done at the national level. Usually done at the county or city level. Now, a lot of cities and counties in the U.S. that have rent control, very few of them enforce it. The vast majority of places in the U.S., rents are free to be whatever they will be on the market. But a handful of places have pretty vigorous rent control jurisdictions. The two most famous being New York City and San Francisco. And so New York City, which is much studied, New York City has had rent control since the early part of the 20th century. It didn't start enforcing it until the end of World War II. The rent control outcomes in New York is one of the most studied things that economists have done. want to share with you some of the things that have been discovered by our research into rent control in New York. Now, rents, of course, are different than things like gasoline or apartments. Gasoline is basically one kind of gas, or 2 or 3 kinds of gasoline, or natural gas, or home heating fuel. You can't just set one price for rental units. It's ridiculous to charge the same price for a 1-bedroom studio apartment on Staten Island that you charge for a 3-story apartment penthouse on 5th Avenue in Manhattan. So the way rent control works in every place that uses it is a rent control board is created, and the rent control board has the power to grant or to deny to landlords any requested increases in rents. And so the rents for penthouse apartments on 5th Avenue are a lot higher than are the rents for studio apartments on Staten Island. But in both cases, I'll get to a qualification in all the cases where rent control reigns, the landlords, if they want to raise the rent, they have to first get permission from the rent control board. That's simplifying a little bit, but not too much. New York has this bizarre twist. New York basically says, look, we don't care about rich people. We've got a lot of bond traders and stockbrokers and rich Broadway actors and directors. We don't care about them. They're luxury apartments. They can rent for whatever people are willing to pay. So really top-end apartments in New York City are not subject to rent control. No one cares what George Clooney pays for his apartment, or what Lady Gaga pays for her apartment, or rents her apartment for in Manhattan. People care about working and poor families. That's where rent control bites. We're going to control the rents of people who need rents to be controlled. Their rents kept down. The poor and the middle class. So that's who, in New York City, I'm not sure how it works in San Francisco. In New York City, rent control applies only to housing for middle and lower income people, not luxury rental units. So what we discovered when we researched rent control in New York? Well, not surprisingly, it causes a shortage. It's very difficult if you ever tried to do it. I did. Try to rent an apartment in Manhattan. They're not readily available. Because there's a shortage of rental units for people of ordinary incomes in New York, because the price is kept lower than the rental rates kept lower than what it would be absent the rent control. By keeping the price lower, we create that shortage. The quantity supplied falls. Now this happens over time. It doesn't happen immediately. But the way it typically happens is, suppose you're a builder and you acquire land somewhere in New York City. You think about building residential apartments or residential housing. And you know there's rent control in place. The rent control makes it less likely that you will build housing that will be subject to the rent control board. You become more likely to build either luxury apartments or to build owner-occupied apartments, condominiums. Rent control applies only to rent. It doesn't apply to the price that you pay to buy a place to live. So not only does rent control diminish the willingness to even build places for people to live in New York City, it doesn't eliminate it, but it does reduce it. It also, the rent control does, turns many of the places that are built into either luxury apartments or into owner-occupied apartments. Rent control has the perverse effect of artificially increasing the supply of housing for rich people and keeping more limited than otherwise housing for people of ordinary incomes. If you build a condominium, you increase the supply of owner-occupied housing. You make it less costly to buy a place. You got to have a lot of money to buy a place, typically. You make it more likely that luxury apartments are going to get built. And you reduce the price that Lady Gaga has to pay to rent a place in New York. But you decrease the supply of housing for people of ordinary and middle income in New York. There's also, we know, a tendency for condominium conversions to take place. So we trace the history of the New York City Rent Control Board, and we can identify times when it's a little bit more likely to grant rental increase requests or deny them. Depends on politics and culture. And during those periods when the New York City Rent Control Board is very harsh to landlords, no, you may not raise your rents at all. Those are periods where we get more condominium conversions. In other words, the owner of the apartment complex basically says, to heck with it. I'm not going to be in this business anymore. So as soon as all of your, talking to the tenants now, all of your leases run out, you got to leave because I'm no longer going to rent. I'm selling all these units to people who want to buy them. Now you can buy them from me, but then you need a big down payment. The reason you're renting in the first place is probably because you can't afford to buy. So you got to move out. And so when rent control gets strict, we get more condominium conversions. Rent control was really strict in the 1960s. I used to live for a number of years in Westchester County, New York, and I would take the Metro North train down from Westchester to Grand Central Station. And when you come into Manhattan, I haven't done this in a number of years. I'm pretty sure it's still the same. It was certainly true 20 years ago. You come into Manhattan, and you look in Manhattan, right, probably the most valuable piece of real estate ever in human history, 22 square miles of incredibly valuable real estate. And you look down in Manhattan, in the northern part of Manhattan, and you see shells of buildings. And they've been shells of buildings abandoned since the 1960s. In the 1960s, a bunch of landlords just abandoned their buildings. And some of them tried to burn their buildings down. They hired arsonists to try to burn their buildings down. Anybody know why? Insurance. It became so unprofitable to be a landlord in some parts of New York City in the 1960s that owners just walked away. Many of them, very dishonest and unethical, of course, in order to try to cut their losses and get their insurance claims, would hire arsonists. We know this because some of the arsonists got caught, and the landlords got caught and got convicted. We're pretty sure that there were other landlords who did the same thing but managed not to get convicted. Rent control gave building owners the incentive to destroy their buildings. And at least until about the year 2000, again, I can't verify, I haven't been back to that part of the city since then, but at least since about the year 2000, 2001, no one has had an incentive to rebuild those buildings into rental units. It still had squatters living in them. This is New York City, a very desirable place to live. And that's because landlords didn't want to build. Yeah.
There also be corruption in the board. Like the landlords would like do something extra to the board to approve their.
All I know is that these places were still abandoned. And the best explanation I can think of is that because of rent control, it didn't pay in that part of the city. The belief is that, well, people aren't going to buy building places to buy would be too expensive, and that's not gonna work. So if they build places to rent for low and middle income people, well, that's gonna subject us to the rent control board. Well, that means the rent control board is too likely to prevent us from charging rents that cover our costs. So no point in doing it. So that's why those buildings were abandoned. A lot of people move to New York, they expect to get an apartment. They move from Kansas, they want to be an actor or an actress. And they get to Manhattan, bright lights, big city, pretty exciting. It's a great place, I love New York. You get there and you try to find a place to live. You can't find a place in Manhattan or New York City. There are places outside of New York City that don't have rent control or that don't enforce rent control. Bergen County, New Jersey, for example, just across the Hudson River from Manhattan. You can see Manhattan. You can almost swim to Manhattan from Bergen County. It's a close-in suburb. Suppose you're a landlord in Bergen County, New Jersey, and there's no enforced rent control in Bergen County, New Jersey, like Arlington County to DC. Suppose you're a landlord in Bergen County, New Jersey. What do you think, from your narrow self-interest, of rent control in New York? You love it. You know why? Because people show up in New York, they want to live in New York. And they get to New York and they can't find a place to live. Some of them go back to Kansas, but most of them don't go back to Kansas. They say, oh, well, I'll take the second best option. I'll live in the suburbs. So they go to Bergen County, New Jersey. They go to suburban Connecticut. They go to further out on Long Island. They live in the suburbs. Rent control therefore also causes sprawl. More sprawl than it would otherwise be. Causes people to live further out from the city than they would want. They would prefer to live in the city. They can't find places, many of them, in the city, so they live in the suburbs. That drives up rents in the suburbs. That's why you, as a landlord in Bergen County, love rent control in New York City. Hello. It enables me to charge higher rents. So many of the tenants who are meant to be protected by New York City rent control wind up paying higher rents anyway. They just pay higher rents in a less desirable place, in the suburbs, and they have to commute. It's very difficult to find any economist who has a kind word to say about rent control. It's designed to help renters. It reduces the supply of housing. One final thing about rent control before we call it a day. I mentioned earlier that one of the consequences of price ceilings is that they reduce quality. This is much studied. Suppose you're a landlord. Most landlords, or at least many landlords, are not big corporations. Some of them are. A lot of landlords in New York are ordinary families. They own a duplex in Queens or a threeplex in Brooklyn. Am I being boring? Apparently a lot of people, I must be boring. Anyway, I don't care. So, ordinary families living in New Jersey. So suppose you're one of these landlords, and you have a little duplex in Queens, and you're making a little bit of income from it. But you're able to raise your rents enough to cover your costs. But there's a long waiting list of clients, of potential tenants. If you happen to lose the people who are living there now, no problem. You got a waiting list of people waiting to rent from you. How much do you care about keeping your current tenants? Not much. If you lose them, you get another group of tenants in. So it's January 15th, you're in New Jersey, you own a place in Queens. It's a long drive. There's a blizzard outside. It's an even longer drive. You do it on a beautiful day, a beautiful night at 3 a.m. You might make the drive in 30 minutes. You do it during the blizzard, take you a couple hours. You get a call. Your tenant says the heat's going out. Come fix it. You say, it's late at night. You hang up. Now, if you're a good person, you go fix it, or more likely, you call a handyman who's going to charge you special prices to go out in a blizzard to fix your unit's heating, but you can hire someone to do it, and they'll do it. It's going to cost you. And as a landlord, you should do that. Ethically, you should. But you don't have much incentive to do that. Because you're thinking to yourself, if I go fix it myself, or if I pay a really high price to hire a heating specialist to go out in the blizzard at 3 a.m. in the morning, that's going to cost me a lot of money. I don't think I'll do that. And your spouse turns over and says, why not? I say, well, if I don't do it, these people will probably get a little bit angry. I mean, they'll leave. I don't care. I got a long list of people who want to rent my place. And sure enough, your current tenants leave, and you fill it with another set of tenants who are very happy to get the place. The quality of housing in rent-controlled places falls because landlords don't have to care about it as much as they do without rent control. If the price is at equilibrium, quantity supply is equal to quantity demanded. If you lose a tenant, you might not be able to get one in quickly enough. You're going to have an empty unit for a while. You're not making any money on it, just all cost. With rent control, you lose a tenant, get another one in right away, because there's a long line of people who want to rent your place. So you can let the quality fall and still not worry about not being able to rent your units. Any question about rent control? Here's what we'll do next week. We'll talk about, I have one other very strange example of a price ceiling to tell you about. It's kind of fun. We'll spend a few minutes on that. And then we'll talk about price floors. A price floor is a minimum price, a price below which the sellers are not allowed to sell. It's the opposite of a price ceiling. We'll see it has many of the same kinds of effects. See you guys next week.
You still hold out?